Section 71A of the VAT Act stipulates a number of requirements that have to be met before output VAT can be levied in South Africa. There needs to be the supply by any vendor of goods or services in the course or furtherance of any enterprise that is carried on by him, of course, or her, or definition of enterprise. Enterprise is defined in the VAT Act, and it has a list of specific inclusions as well as some things that are specifically excluded. But the starting point for the definition, it says enterprise means, in the case of any vendor, any enterprise or activity which is carried on continuously or regularly by any person in the Republic or partly in the Republic, and in the course or furtherance of which goods or services are supplied to any other person for a consideration, whether or not for a profit, including any enterprise or activity carried on in the form of a commercial, financial, industrial, mining, farming, fishing, municipal or professional concern, or any other concern of a continuing nature, or in the form of an association or club. Let's unpack each of these aspects a bit further. So if we start off by looking at any enterprise or activity, if you think about it, it includes any type of business that is carried on, whether it's commercial, financial, mining, farming, fishing, municipal, professional business, and it also includes associations and clubs, like for example sport clubs. It needs to be carried on continuously and regularly, which means things like once-off private sales will usually not attract VAT, and it also excludes transactions of a private nature because these are separate from the business. Municipalities also have to levy output VAT on the goods or services that they supply, for example, water and electricity. Do you remember that electricity is specifically included into the definition of goods? And I really want you to work carefully through the relevant part in your textbook where they talk about what constitutes taxable supplies or goods or services from a municipality's perspective that actually carries VAT. The enterprise definition goes further to say it's any enterprise or activity carried on continuously or regularly in South Africa or partly in South Africa. And remember, this links back to the fact that VAT is a destination-based tax, and it is aimed at taxing the consumption of goods or services in South Africa or partly in South Africa. In order for a vendor to be carrying on an enterprise, they need to supply goods and services for a consideration. And the term consideration is specifically defined in Section 1 of the VAT Act. And in general, it is the total amount of money, including VAT, that is received for a supply. However, for transactions like barter transactions, where we're not paying with cash, we're paying, giving an asset in exchange for another asset, or instead of paying for trading stock with cash, we pay for it with a manufacturing machine or a building, then the consideration will be the open market value, which includes VAT, of the goods or services that is received for making the taxable supply. Any act or forbearance, in other words, a delay in enforcing a legal right, whether voluntary or not, for the inducement, listen to these very high words, in other words, inducement, something that persuades somebody to do something, for the supply of goods or services is included as consideration. Specifically included as consideration is any deposit that is received on a returnable container. Other deposits, whether they are refundable or not, will only be included as consideration if the deposit is applied as consideration or if it is ultimately forfeited. Excluded from the definition of consideration is a donation that's made to an association not for gain. In other words, donations that an association that not for gain that they receive does not form part of consideration, which means It doesn't form part of the carrying on of their enterprise. Okay. Whether or not for a profit, doesn't matter whether the business have a profit motive to be able to conduct an enterprise for VAT purposes, and this is why public benefit organizations can also register as VAT vendors. If you think about PBOs, public benefit organizations, their ultimate goal is to serve the greater good, but in order to boost that, they can actually sell goods that maybe the recipients of their services make. So while they overall don't have a profit motive, they can still register for VAT because a profit motive is not a requirement to be carrying on an enterprise. If we look at what is specifically included in the enterprise definition, it specifically includes anything done with regards to the commencement or termination of an enterprise. In other words, anything you do starting or ending a business is going to form part of the carrying on of an enterprise. Also specifically included is the activities of welfare organizations. There are, of course, other inclusions like implementing agencies and the supply of electronic services by foreign suppliers, but these are only done in later academic years. Very important, and you will see how this becomes relevant when we go on with VAT, is what is excluded from the definition of enterprise. Now, the supply of services by an employee to an employer is specifically excluded from the carrying on of an enterprise, which means there's no VAT on the salaries and wages that's paid by an employer to an employee, because those services that are rendered by the employee to the employer, they do not form part of the carrying on of an enterprise by the employee. Also excluded is any hobby, something that is done for pleasure and in your leisure time. Exempt supplies, and when we look at the different types of supplies, we're going to chat about these quite a bit. And then also excluded from the definition of enterprise is commercial accommodation, so hotels, bed and breakfasts, Airbnbs, etc., if the value of the taxable supplies is less than 120,000 Rand for 12 months. And if you think back to our voluntary registration requirements, a vendor or a person that provides commercial accommodation, their voluntary registration threshold is not 50,000, it is 120,000. And until they reach that 120,000, they're not carrying on an enterprise, which means they won't be able to register anyway, right? So please make sure that you take a look at what is specifically included in the definition of enterprise and what is specifically excluded.